Recording in progress.
There we go. All right, so for today's talk, I thought, casting about a little bit when setting the dates with Bob about what to do, and sort of thinking, 18th of November. I thought, oh yes, that's 5 days before the memorial of quite a famous Zen master, Japanese Zen master from the medieval period, called Daito. And he wrote, he gave a sermon. He was master to two of the emperors of Japan. In fact, I can read you a little bit about him. So this is from the book The Zen Reader, First Zen Reader by Eric Cheetham, which is a collection of Zen articles. The original face is a sermon delivered to the Emperor Hanazono by Zen Master Myocho, who is best known under the name bestowed by him, upon him by the Emperor, Daito Kokuji. Kokuji means literally teacher of the nation. Daito, 1281 to 1337, was one of the great lights of the Rinzai sect in Japan. Rinzai is just one of the schools of Zen Buddhism. He hid himself for some time disguised as a beggar to evade fame. The picture by Master Hakuin, who was the later Zen master, shows him in this role. It's just a picture that's there. So that's a little bit about him. As I say, he gave this sermon called The Original Face, which it's just a couple of pages long, so I'll read it out and then go through it. I'm not sure if I'll get through it all tonight. There's quite a lot here, but we'll get as far as we can, because there's a lot of useful, very practical, and also very spiritual information there that I think touches on a lot of points to do with the teaching, and also particularly in the Zen school as well. Just a little bit about Shuho Myocho, or Daito Kokuji, as it is. So he came to his own insight by hearing a key fall onto a table, which was just like a random sound. And this is something that features again and again in many of the stories connected with the Zen school. If you're familiar with the story of the Buddha, you'll know that he attained his enlightenment after sitting under the Bodhi tree, what's called the tree of enlightenment. Bodhi just means enlightenment in Sanskrit. He sat there for 7 days and 7 nights, and on the morning of the 8th day, he said he looked up into the clear morning sky. He saw the morning star, and at that moment, when that sensory impact came in, he awoke and became the Buddha. In other words, he attained enlightenment, he attained insight, and hence he, after that time, was called the Buddha. Buddha is not a name, it's a title. It means the awakened one. The term Bud means to wake up, or one who is awake. And this, in the Zen school, which arose in China originally, but moved through Southeast Asia to Japan, and now obviously has come west also more recently. In China at the time, around about the 5th century of the Common Era, Buddhism had begun to establish itself, and a number of Chinese schools, specifically Chinese schools of Buddhism, began to arise that were distinct from the Indian schools that had preceded it. And one of those schools was called the Chan school, which is the Chinese term for Zen, Zen being the Japanese term. And it arose because they felt that there was too much reliance on a sort of philosophical understanding of Buddhism and not the direct insight into the nature of reality, which the Buddha himself had attained. The whole point about the Enlightenment is that it's not an intellectual experience at all. It's a phenomenological one. It's a direct experiencing for oneself, seeing things as they really are, seeing into what's called the true nature, seeing into reality. So it's the experience of that consciousness that can see things as they really are. And so the Zen school arose putting the emphasis on this personal insight. So personal insight became, if you like, the marker. And in fact, to the point that the Zen school almost used to appear as if it shunned, the sort of regular doctrinal learning and understanding, which actually isn't true. There was a lot of doctrinal learning as well. And despite the fact that the Zen masters said, less talk, more insight, actually the Zen canon itself of writings is voluminous. So there was no shortage of people wanting to write things in the Zen school either. But Daito Kokushi himself, as I said, came into his own insight one day, as I say, when someone dropped a key accidentally onto a table. And rather in the same way when the Buddha saw the morning star, this insight arose in him with that sense, with that sensory experience. And as you'll hear from this sermon on the original face, he also talks about some of the other experiences that some of the other Zen masters actually had. So the story goes that after his awakening, he decided to undergo what was called a maturation period. It said that for him it lasted 20 years. It probably only lasted about 7 years. But what he did was that he dressed as a beggar and he hid under the bridge, under what was called the fifth bridge, going into Kyoto, which if you think like London Bridge, Kyoto also had a bridge as well. And it was very noisy. It was the main thoroughfare in and out of the city. And he used to sit zazen, used to sit meditation underneath that bridge. And basically he disappeared. But occasionally the odd sort of seeker, the odd student would find him out and they would say, please, I would like to be your student. And so Daito Kokushi always set them the same task. He said, well then, sit zazen underneath this bridge for 3 days and I will take you as a student, and none of them could. Anyway, so the time came that the emperor decided that Daito Kokushi had to be found. But no one knew where he actually was. It was still a secret. And so the emperor decided to set a trap for him. So he called one of his servants and said, dress as a seller of melons, go as a melon seller into the marketplace and offer to these melons for free. So anybody can come and take one, but you must be able to take it without using your hands. And so the melon seller said, okay, so he went into the marketplace and shouted, melons for free, and people came and said, yes, I'll take one. He said, well, you can help yourself, but you must be able to take a melon without using your hands, and nobody could. And this beggar sort of rolls up and he says, I'll have a melon. And he said, well, you can take it without using your hands, then you can have it. And immediately this beggar said, well, if you can give me it without using yours, then I will. And immediately they knew that they had Daito Kokushi, so they took him in. And he actually founded a monastery, a training monastery, called Daitokuji, which is named after him, which is still there in Kyoto. It's one of the 5 great Zen training sodos, where my own late teacher also trained at Daitokuji in the 1960s. So that's him, and this is his sermon. So this sermon was given, obviously, to the court, to the royal court. So this is a sermon that he gave to lay people like us. It wasn't just for monks and nuns. So just to keep that in mind. All Zen students should devote themselves at the beginning to zazen, that's sitting in meditation, sitting in either the fully locked position or the half-locked position, with the eyes half shut, seeing the original face which was before father or mother were born. This means to see the state before the parents were born, before heaven and earth were parted, before you received human form. What is called the original face will appear. That original face is something without colour or form, like the empty skyline whose clarity there is no form. The original face is really nameless, but it is indicated by such terms as original face, the Lord, the Buddha nature, and the true Buddha. It is as with man, who has no name at birth, but afterwards various names are attached to him. The 1700 koan, or themes, to which Zen students devote themselves are all only for making them see their original face. The world-honoured one, that's the Buddha, sat in meditation in the snowy mountains for 6 years, then saw the morning star and was enlightened, and this was seeing his original face. When it is said of others of the ancients that they had a great realization or a great breaking through, it means they saw the original face. The second patriarch stood in the snow and cut off his arm to get realization. The sixth patriarch heard the phrase from the Diamond Sutra and was enlightened. Rayan was enlightened when he saw the peach blossoms. Kyogen, on hearing the tile, hit the bamboo. Rinzai, when struck by Obaku. Tozan, on seeing his own reflection in the water. All this is what is called meeting the Lord and Master. The body is a house, and it must have a master. It is the master of the house who is known as the original face. Experiencing heat and cold and so on, or feeling a lack, or having desires, these are all delusive thoughts and do not belong to the true master of the house. These delusive thoughts are something added. They are things which vanish with each breath. To be dragged along by them is to fall into hell, to circle in the 6 paths of rebirth. By going deeper and deeper into Zazen, find the source of the thoughts. A thought is something without any form or body, but, owing to the conviction of those thoughts remaining even after death, man falls into hell with its many pains or suffers in the round of this changing world. Every time a thought arises, throw it away. Just devote yourselves to sweeping away the thoughts. Sweeping away thoughts means performing Zazen. When thought is put down, the original face appears. The thoughts are like clouds. When the clouds have cleared, the moon appears. That moon of eternal truth is the original face. The heart itself is verily the Buddha. What is called seeing one's nature means to realize the heart Buddha. Again and again, put down the thoughts and then see the heart Buddha. It might be supposed from this that the true nature will not be visible except when sitting in meditation. That is a mistake. Yokadaishi says, going to is Zen. Sitting to is Zen. Speaking or silent, moving the body or still, he is at peace. This teaches that going and sitting and talking are all Zen. It is not only being in Zazen and suppressing the thoughts. Whether rising or sitting, keep concentrated and watchful. All of a sudden, the original face will confront you. So that's the sermon. And there's obviously a lot in it, but it's very direct and it's very clear. And if you like, this is like a distillation of the teachings, not only of Zen, but actually the teachings of the Buddha, because we shouldn't forget that the Zen school is a Buddhist school. So this understanding, this realization of the true nature, what is called the true nature, sometimes it's called the original face, sometimes it's called the true face, as he said, sometimes it's called the Lord, or the Buddha nature, or the true Buddha, or the heart Buddha. All these, as he says, are just names for the same thing, the same realization. So it's no different in different schools. When we talk about realization or enlightenment, etc., this is what it's being pointed to. But he begins by talking about sitting meditation. All Zen students should devote themselves at the beginning to Zazen, that's sitting in meditation. Sitting in either the fully locked position or the half-locked position with the eyes half shut, see the original face which was before father or mother were born. So, if you have a look, if you have a look at the Satipatthana Sutta, which is a scripture in the Pali Canon from the very first teachings that were documented of the Buddha's teaching, there the Buddha himself gives the instructions both for sitting meditation and what's perhaps more commonly in English called mindfulness, which is the practice, if you like, of meditation in activity. Later on, towards the end, when he's saying sitting is Zen, talking is Zen, remaining silent is Zen, moving about is Zen, going about your daily lives is Zen, as well as Zazen is Zen, as well. This meditation in activity is what Daito Kokushi is referring to. So basically what he's saying is that the practice of sitting meditation, what we call zazen, is not different in kind to what we are practicing every moment of the day. So the practice of meditation isn't just, half an hour or an hour or however long you sit. And in fact, if you go to the monasteries, in Japan, the Zen monasteries in Japan, they may sit 2 hours, maybe 3 most per day. But the rest of the day, which is a long day, they don't have a lot of sleep, is spent busy working. They do a lot of physical work around the temples, a lot of cleaning, a lot of work in the gardens, repairing the buildings, etc., etc. And it's quite energetic and deliberately so. One of the early Zen masters, Zen Master Hyakujo, who actually formulated the rules of for monks in first China and then obviously in Japan, had a famous phrase that said, "A day without work is a day without food." And this was because when Buddhism came from India through to China, the Chinese actually didn't like begging. Whereas India has a long tradition of, holy people, gurus and so forth, going out to beg for food. This was part of their poverty, and that was fine. People would support them. The Buddha actually, set the whole of the Sangha up like that. In China, this was considered highly disrespectful. And the truth is, they still do a little bit of begging, but they couldn't rely on it. So they had to work. They had to grow their own food. And they had to change some of the rules because in the Indian monks, the Indian Buddhist monks, for example, one of the Vinaya rules, one of the rules that the Buddha set up for the monks and the nuns was that they couldn't carry money. And that was deliberate so that they couldn't earn money, so that they had to rely on the community to support them. The purpose of that was that if the monks weren't doing their job properly, if they became lazy or began ignoring the laity and not teaching them and supporting them, then the laity could withdraw the support and the monks would have to disrobe. So it was a sort of safety valve, if you like, to make sure that things didn't go wrong. So that had to be abandoned. That rule had to be abandoned. And the Buddha said that was okay before he died. He said, the rules change according to the circumstances. Possibly, one of the most important teachings of the Buddha is the teaching of impermanence, that everything is subject to change. So he couldn't make permanent rules and say this is always going to apply forever in all circumstances. That in itself would go against the principle of anicca or impermanence. But he said that we had to understand why those rules were there. So if they were being dropped, then we had to know, the importance of why they had been there in the first place. So that was one of the rules that had to change. And Hyakujo very cleverly, he said, well, if we're going to change this rule, then we're going to make the work part of the practice itself. And this is then when Zen put a very strong emphasis on physicality and on the physical form, using the body, cultivating the physical form as part of the practice. So why do we do that? Well, now we can go back and have a look at the zazen. So why do we sit zazen? I mean, if we're practicing meditation, in daily life, why do we need zazen? Well, zazen allows us to go more deeply into meditation than when we're actually engaged in activity. The quiet and the stillness, the ability to be able to stop the form, is almost like a partial sensory deprivation. And what that allows us to do is to go deeper into the physical sensation of being embodied, being in the body in the first place. So if you practice any form of Buddhist meditation, almost certainly you would have practiced a meditation on the breath, of one sort, either just on the breath or putting a count on the breath, but usually it's around the breath, and it's usually around the out-breath. And the Buddha, in the Satipatthana Sutta, says that the monk goes to a tree, sits underneath a tree, because at that time the monks used to live in the forest, and there he would sit himself down in the half-locked or full-locked position. That was in the half-lotus or the full lotus position. It doesn't exclude sitting meditation on chairs, etc., or using other positions such as kneeling. We all do that. But this was the traditional way of sitting. And then he talks about, he becomes aware of the breath. So that meditation on the breath goes right the way back to the Buddha. And this is, and Daito also talks about the breath as well. And in the Satipatthana Sutta, the Buddha describes, he says, when the monk breathes in a long breath, he knows he breathes in a long breath. When he breathes out a long breath, he knows he breathes out a long breath. When he breathes in a short breath, he knows he breathes in a short breath, and so on in this way. And so he describes it that there is someone there who knows. When he knows he's breathing in a long breath, when he breathes in a long breath, he knows he's breathing in a long breath. But the question is, who is this one who knows? And this is the key to what Daito is talking about when he's talking about the original face. Because if you remember, he goes on to say, sitting in either the fully locked position or the half-locked position with the eyes half shut, see the original face, which was before father or mother were born. And then he goes on, so when he goes on and he starts saying about it's really formless and nameless, but it has names like the Buddha and the Lord and the true nature and the heart Buddha. It's this original face that he's referring to. So he's saying, go into Zazen and see the original face. So what is this original face? Well, this original face is this one who knows. And here now we have to be very careful, because this is where the language becomes tricky. Because immediately I think, oh, well, that's me, isn't it? You know, I'm the one who, if I'm breathing in a long breath, then I know I'm breathing in a long breath. And if I'm, if I'm picking up this wooden striker, then I can feel it. I'm the one who's feeling it in my hand right now. And as I roll it backwards and forwards, I can feel it moving over my fingers, over the ends of my fingers. I am the one who does that. But is that actually the case? Although it appears to be like that, although it appears to be me, is this actually the case? And there's a distinction, now we go back, there's a distinction in Sanskrit that we find in the Buddhist scriptures. Two words that are used for the one word that we use, consciousness or conscious awareness. There is a word vijnana, which means sense consciousness, and there's another word called sati, which means specifically awareness. That's waking, or the consciousness that we have when we are awake. And they're different. They're actually two different things. But usually we conflate them when we use English, because we just generally call them consciousness. So what is the difference between these two things? So, for example, last night, 2 o'clock in the morning, Sunday night, I'm sort of presuming no one was out partying last night, and that possibly you were in bed, probably asleep, okay? And imagine that, you know, the bedclothes had sort of fallen off you, okay? And you were lying there. And the heating turns off in the room, and it was getting, the weather was getting cooler, and the room got cooler. And your body begins to react. The hairs on your body, you get those goosebumps, the goose flesh, wouldn't you? Because the hairs on the body stand up when we're cold. And you may have been fast asleep, but it's quite possible that you could have rolled over, reached for the bedclothes, and pulled them back onto you. And when you woke up in the morning, you would have no memory of that, because you weren't actually awake, were you? You were asleep at the time. So consciously, you weren't there. The sati wasn't there. But something felt cold. Something lying there felt cold. And not just felt the cold, but responded. Responded by reaching out for the bedclothes and pulling them over. Yeah? Makes sense? So there is something that knows, even when I am not there. And this morning, because I had to go to work this morning, and my alarm goes off at 6:30, and it's dark, and I was asleep, and my alarm went off, and I was asleep. I was fast asleep. But if I was fast asleep, who heard that alarm? Who heard the alarm and woke me up? Because if I'm not there, something hears that alarm, and not only hears that alarm, but knows what it is. And I don't know whether you've had the experience, for example, I remember in my youth when I used to go to parties, which I haven't been to for a while, and I remember it was quite a late party, and I fell asleep at the party, just sitting in a chair. And it was really noisy. There was lots of music, lots of people talking, moving about, shouting, that's all the usual thing. I slept through all that. But somebody said my name, Martin, and I woke up. So who not only could differentiate between all that noise and not wake me up, but as soon as I hear and recognize my own name, I wake up. Something woke me up. Who is that one? This is what Daito is referring to as the original face before father and mother were born. So what does he mean by that, before father and mother were born? Well, father and mother are a very classic pair of opposites. He also goes on to say, this means to see the state before father and mother were born. This means to see the state before the parents were born, before heaven and earth were parted, before you received human form. So don't be careful now, because don't make the mistake. He's not talking about some kind of primordial thing that happened millions of years ago, although he's not talking about that either. But what he's talking about is that there is something awake in us right now that knows that is not human and that is not me, that has no preferences, it doesn't have desires, it doesn't have thoughts, it just knows. And this is what's known as Buddha. This is what's known as the heart Buddha. Remember, Buddha simply means the one who is awake. There is something in us that is always awake. And we may be fast asleep, we could be distracted, we may be thinking, off with the fairies, whatever, but there's something that knows, which is just as well, because if we're walking down the street and crossing the road and our mind's on something else, it's just as well that someone's paying attention to the traffic and not bumping into people. So this thing that knows is not just a passive thing, it's active, it's functioning as well. And this is what's known as the heart Buddha, or the true face, or the original face. And everything else comes afterwards. What I regard as myself, my identity, who I am, my preferences, what I like, what I don't like, all of this arises after this true face. It's not this true face. None of those things is the true face at all. But it's ever present. And this is the thing that is to be realized. And the realization of this is to realize that this is in fact what we really are. And in Buddhism, all those other things, such as me, my preferences and my opinions and my wishes and the things that I don't like and all those thoughts, those are not really me. What he said, he refers to as that they, he says, he said, so experiencing heat and cold, feeling a lack, feeling that something's missing in my life, and we're all searching for the meaning of life. Maybe that's why we're here, I don't know. Having desires, wanting to be happy, wanting things to be better. I wish the world was the way I think it should be. These are all delusive thoughts and do not belong to the true master of the house. So this master of the house is simply just another way of talking about this original face. Okay? But none of those thoughts have anything to do with it. So we see what the Buddha has done here. He's basically saying that what I think I am is actually a delusion. It's not real. Because when I fall asleep, it's gone. And when I am in a deep sleep, it's completely gone. There's no I lying there, but there's something there. There's something conscious and something that is feeling and sensing and responding to the circumstances. And this is only the beginning of it. Because actually what the Buddha said was that this Buddha nature isn't mine. It's something that pervades everything. This is what's known as the Dharma. And the Dharma in non-living things is called the Dharma nature. In in living beings, it's called the Buddha nature. But that doesn't mean that there are two Dharmas. Both of these are the one Dharma. It's just that we differentiate between this true nature in living beings and the true nature in non-living beings. So this, whatever it is, this original face, pervades the universe, pervades everything, past, present, and future, all beings, through all time. So it's a very different picture. It's a very different understanding of the common one, the accepted one, that this is me, that is you, and this is you, and so on. There's something very different. The original face is something without colour or form, like the empty sky, in whose clarity there is no form. This ties in with what I was saying earlier about impermanence, and impermanence being really central to the Buddha's teachings. That all things are subject to change. If all things are subject to change, then these forms are constantly undergoing a transformation from one thing into another, whether it's going from living to dead, or dead into rebirth and living again, or being male or female, or yellow or green, or tall or short, or animal or plant. These things are constantly undergoing changes. And I remember, and we often just don't factor that into the way that we see both ourselves and others as well, that nothing is staying the same. Things may appear to be, but actually nothing is staying the same. And I remember coming across an interesting article by a scientist many years ago who was describing how 65 million years ago the sun was shining down on a primordial forest, and the plants and trees would have been photosynthesizing, and that photosynthesis turns that energy, that light energy, into carbohydrates. And if the trees or the plants are felled and they fall into the swamp, and through a long process they undergo a transformation, and if those plants, etc., have been eaten as well by very tiny organisms, those little organisms then die and they build up into a sediment as well, and they eventually change and they become what we know as things like coal and oil, etc. And that oil, 65 million years later, can be extracted from the ground and undergo a process to produce petrol, which is then put into a car. And then that car can be driven, and if it happens to be night, the driver may turn the lights on, and for the first time in 65 million years, that energy becomes the photons, the light particles that it was 65 million years ago. And that light goes back out into the universe again from Earth. And it was a lovely description, well, probably a lot better than I've sort of described it, but it was a very nice description of this cycle, that something is undergoing these transformations, something is always undergoing these transformations. And the Buddha said that we do the same thing. And if you're familiar with the Buddhist Wheel of Life, you will have seen something on there that looks very similar as well. And Daito refers to it when he says that these delusive thoughts are something added. He said, they are things which vanish with each breath. To be dragged along by them is to fall into hell, to circle in the 6 paths of rebirth. Now, there's this hell and these 6 paths of rebirth. On that wheel of life, you see that it's like a large pie that's sort of cut into 6 slices. And there are 6 realms there. There's the heavenly realm, the fighting demons realm, the asuras. There's the animal realm, the hell realms. There's the hungry ghosts, as they're called, and then there's the human realm. Now, these are the realms, what are called the realms of rebirth. But where does this rebirth take place? Well, it takes place in this body. So those 6 realms exist in us. We are, these 6 realms are the six psychological states, or 6 mental states, into which we are constantly being reborn. And I can give an example of that because many years ago when I first started Zen training, one of the suggestions that was given, and it wasn't just given, we were expected to obviously do it, was to set up a small timetable. A time to get up and a time to go to bed, put our meals on it. Obviously, if you're working, you've pretty much got a timetable. Put your sitting meditation, your zazen on it as well. Just keep it simple, don't overcomplicate it like that. And then just stick to it. And the purpose of this was to try and learn to let go a little bit of those impulses, what I want in the moment. Like if I put my going to bed time as 11 o'clock from Monday to Friday, say, and I'm just watching a TV program and it doesn't finish till 11:30, it produces a bit of a dilemma in me because am I going to carry on watching this film, which has really caught my attention, or am I going to obey the timetable? And it's down to us what we want to do, but if we've committed to do the training and to make a few sacrifices and to practice a little bit of restraint, because that's what this is, and if we're learning to let go of having everything my own way, and just learning to let go, remember that the Buddha taught that being attached to my wishes and my desires actually causes us suffering, so we're experimenting with this timetable to see if we can let go a little bit of I, let go of a little bit of what I want right now. So who's going to win? Is it going to be my way? Is it going to be the Buddha's way? Well, it's entirely up to us what we do. And, this was something that just said, just try it out. The purpose of which, and it was made very clear, so the purpose of the timetable is simply to produce emotional reactions in us and to learn to contain those emotional reactions and to learn to let go of them. And it's a very safe little thing to do because there's absolutely no moral high ground to be gained by going to bed at 11 o'clock rather than 11:30. It's purely an experiment and it's undertaken quite voluntarily just to see. So we had this thing. Now, at the other end of the day, we had to get up as well, obviously, in the morning. So the thing was, I had a bit of a habit. So at that time, I had to go to work. I used to get up at 7 o'clock. My alarm would go off at 7 o'clock. And I've long been in the habit that I had a radio alarm. And the radio alarm would, switch on, and it would be, Radio 4. And I used to like waking up, and I would wake up just as the news was starting, the 7 o'clock news, and I'd hear the headlines, which would be for 10 minutes, and then I would get out of bed. But the trick was that for the timetable, I was supposed to get up when the alarm went off at 7 o'clock. And try as I might, I just couldn't get out of bed at 7 o'clock because I wanted to lie and, listen to the news. And I remember once, one of our teachers saying, "So how's the timetable going?" I went, "No, that's all right." And they said, "Are you following it, doing it as you should?" And I went, "More or less." He said, "What do you mean, more or less?" And I had to fess up and say, "Well, I just find getting up at 7 o'clock, I like to listen to the news." And he said, "Well, just try getting up at 7." I said, "Okay, I will. I'll try. I'll make an effort." 7 o'clock would come, the alarm would go off. I would just listen to the radio. I just listened to the news. I wasn't going to get out of bed. And I would lie there really sort of having that internal dilemma. Half of me was saying, "You should get out of bed. You said you wanted to do this. get out of bed. Oh, no, I don't want to. Look, it's all right for the Japanese, but they're used to obeying. You know, I'm Westerner. We don't, you know, we rebel against authority and all this sort of thing. And I got into a real state about it, and it actually began to frighten me because I realized I couldn't get out of bed at 7 o'clock through my own will. And the night before, I would say to myself, tomorrow I'm going to get out of bed at 7 o'clock. The alarm would go off, I would just roll over and I'd carry on listening to the news. And so in the end, I sort of went to one of the teachers and said, look, I can't get out of bed. And the first thing he said was, you must stop trying. And I told him that I'd been sort of making this vow the night before. He said, you must stop trying to do it. He said, all you have to do when the alarm goes off, he said, is just grab the clothes and just throw them off the bed, and you can carry on lying there. And he was obviously very perceptive, because actually I did that. As soon as I threw the covers off, of course, I got cold. And it was very easy then to just stand up and get out of bed. Because actually it wasn't the news I was listening to. I was just really cozy, and it was warm, and the room was cold, and I didn't want to get out of bed. But I had another realization as well, because I suddenly realized that the one who made the vow the night before was a different being to the one who woke up at 7 o'clock and didn't want to get out of bed. The one the night before, you could say, was the more human one, who was considered, knew why he was making this vow, but the one in the morning was a hungry ghost. And that's when I realized, oh my God, this isn't me at all. There's something driving this, and it's multiple. It's not one. And that was a real revelation to me. That was a real revelation to me that I am not a unified being at all. Quite literally, we are legion, for we are many. In that way. The Buddha said that none of these are me. But there's something that undergoes these transformations. There is something that undergoes this transformation. But this thing has no shape of its own. It can't. Because if it is to become any form, then it can have no form of its own. It has to be like water. Water has no form of its own. It adopts the form of the vessel that it's poured into. And if you pour it into a different vessel, it can become a different shape. And it can do that because it has no form of its own. This original face, therefore has no form of its own. It is no thing. It's what's called empty. It's empty of all form. And this is known as shunyata, or emptiness. So the nature of this heart Buddha, the nature of the heart is no thing, is emptiness itself. And this is what has to be realized. The problem is that having no shape, it can't be perceived either. It's a mystery. It's what's known as ineffable. Cannot be described, cannot be put into words. And this is why when the Buddha awoke under the Bodhi tree on the morning of the 8th day, he realized he had a problem, because what he had seen was ineffable, was a mystery, because it has no form, it has no shape, it cannot be described, but it is real. It is not, it is all reality. It's the very basis of reality itself. So what was he going to teach? And it was said, according to tradition, the Buddha carried on sitting under the Bodhi tree for another week or so, until the great god Brahma came down and persuaded him to teach those whose eyes were a little covered with dust, not what he had seen, but the way to the same insight. And this is why personal insight is so important in the training. Not just being able to read Sanskrit or being able to recite the teachings of the Buddha. The original face is really nameless, but it is indicated by such terms as original face. So this term original face actually doesn't come from Daito, it comes from one of the Chinese patriarchs called Huineng, who was the sixth patriarch, who was very famous and pivotal in the establishment of the Zen school. So he was originally from Canton in southern China. The story goes that as a young man, he comes from a very poor family. Well, actually, he came from originally quite a wealthy family, but the family was sent into exile. The father died, and they ended up very impoverished. And so he used to sell firewood in the marketplace and to various customers. And it said that one day he was delivering firewood to one of his customers when he heard a monk reciting from a sutra called the Diamond Sutra. It was a very short but very important sutra in Mahayana Buddhism. And upon hearing the sutra, he became enlightened. He had his own profound realization. And he asked the monk, he said, "What is it that you were reciting?" And he was told the Diamond Sutra. He said, "Where can I learn more about this?" And he said, "Well, I've come from the fifth patriarch here, who lives up in the north of China." And so Hui Neng decided that he was going to go to visit the fifth patriarch and ask him about what he had seen, his own experience. So he made provisions for his mother, and he set out and he travelled to the north of China. And he went to the monastery of the fifth patriarch, Gunen, and he said, he got an audience, and Gunen saw him. And as soon as he saw him, he could see that there was something special about this one, just from the way he held himself. So the first question Goodson said was, "Where have you come from?" And he said, "Oh, I come from the south of China." And he said, "And what do you want?" He said, "Well, I've come for the Dharma." And just to know that people in the south of China were considered to be barbarians, and people in the north were considered to be, well brought up, well educated, and all that sort of thing. So the fifth patriarch turned on him and said, "You've come from the barbarian south. You think you can learn anything about the Dharma?" And immediately Hui Neng retorted back. He said, "North or south, the Dharma is equal and even." And the fifth patriarch immediately knew that his intuition had been right, that there was something very special and that he'd clearly seen something. So he said, okay, he said, "You can stay, but I'm not ordaining you. You could work in the rice hulling shed." So he was set to work in hulling the rice, which is a very intensive physical job. Anyway, shortly after that incident, the fifth patriarch said that he was going to retire and he needed to find a successor. So he announced to all his monks saying, "I want you to write a poem expressing your insight and give it to me, and I will make my decision." Well, of course, all the monks said, "Well, there's no point. He's going to appoint the head monk. Everyone knows this." So no one bothered. But the head monk himself, he wasn't so sure about his own insight. Now, at that time, they were redecorating part of the monastery. And so in the middle of the night, he composed the poem and wrote it up on the wall of the part of the monastery where they were doing the redecorating. And in the morning, of course, it was found, and the abbot Gunen came and had a look at it. And the poem was this. It said, "This very body is the Bodhi tree, the tree of enlightenment under which the Buddha sat. The heart is a bright mirror upon a stand. Carefully wipe that mirror each day, each moment, so that no dust may alight on it." Now, you probably think, well, that's actually very similar to what Daito says when he says, "Every time a thought arises, throw it away. Sweeping away thoughts means performing zazen. When thought is put down, the original face appears. The thoughts are like clouds. When the clouds have cleared, the moon, which is the symbol of enlightenment in Buddhism, appears. The moon of eternal truth is the original face." So he seems to be saying exactly the same thing, doesn't he? Just keep wiping that mirror clean so that that bright mirror, that bright moon, can be seen, that this true face can be seen. And Gunen saw this and he said, So he turned to his monks and he said, "Learn this, recite it, put it into practice." He said, "And you won't go wrong. Your heart will be liberated." But simultaneously, he knew that the head monk had not had his own breakthrough. He was still very much on this side of of enlightenment, so to speak. He was still very much having, as it were, to do the practice that he hadn't reached that point of seeing clearly his own heart mirror. And so Hui Neng, who was still working in the rice hulling shed, heard one of the monks reciting this and came along, and Hui Neng also realized that the head monk hadn't had his own insight either. Now, Hui Neng famously was illiterate. So he said to one of his friends, one of the monk friends, he said, well, look, I'm going to compose a poem, and I want you to write it up on the wall next to this poem. So his poem went like this. He said, there is no tree of enlightenment. The bright mirror has no stand. When there is nothing whatsoever, what dust can light wear? So there is no tree of enlightenment, simply meaning that, in fact, this one who sees clearly doesn't become enlightened because it's always enlightened. The whole point about the original face is that it's a fully functioning Buddha. It's in every single one of us, and it's doing exactly what it's supposed to do. The only problem is, the only difference between us and the Buddha is that the Buddha has realized it, and we haven't. We think we are our thoughts. We think we are our opinions. We think we are our wishes and our desires. All those things that I identify with mistakenly, according to the Buddha, those are the things that we are deluded about. Buddhas are not. Buddhas know what they really are. We haven't realized it. But we are but our hearts are fully enlightened, and they always have been, and they can never be anything else either. So this is this was the verse that the sixth patriarch, or Hui Neng, wrote. And when Gunan, the abbot, saw it, he also knew who had written it, and he also, realized that Hui Neng had indeed broken through. But he took his shoe and he wiped it off, and he just dismissed it. And then he went to Hui Neng and he knocked 3 times on the door and then walked away. And Hui Neng knew that he was to go and see the abbot that night in the 3rd period of the night under darkness, which he did. And the Hui Neng basically transmitted the robe and bowl and said, I'm retiring, you will be the 6th patriarch. And he gave him the Buddha's, because at this point they still had the Buddha's robe and the Buddha's begging bowl. And these were the signs of the transmission. And he said, you are now the 6th patriarch, but you must leave here, he said, because people will be very jealous and your life may be in danger. So you must flee, and, for now. And so he did, he left. And the following morning, when Gunan didn't come out of his quarters and didn't give the regular sermon at the middle of the day, they realized the transmission must have taken place. They looked around, saw that Hui Neng was missing, and so they sent out search parties after him. And one particular monk called the Elder Myo, who was a soldier, so he was a very burly monk, and the 6th patriarch Hui Neng was a very short, slight figure. He was, not very strong. The Elder Myo was the monk who caught up with Hui Neng in the mountains. And when Hui Neng heard Myo coming after him, he placed the robe and the bowl on a large rock and hid behind it. And when Myo came up into the clearing, Hui Neng shouted out from behind the rock, "What have you come for?" And Myo shouted, "I've come for the Buddha's robe and bowl, which you stole," because they thought he'd stolen it. And he said, "Well, here they are on the rock, just help yourself." And the Elder Myo grabbed hold of the robe and bowl and tried to lift them, and he found that he couldn't. And at that moment, he realized that Hui Neng must be the genuine article, must be the true 6th patriarch. And so he had what's called a turning around of the heart, and he said, "No, I haven't come for the robe and bowl, I've come for the Dharma. Please say a turning phrase." So a turning phrase is a particular phrase that a Zen master will give in order to try and spring insight onto a student. So Hui Neng came out from behind the rock and famously said his famous koan, which is still used today. He said, before thinking of good and bad, before a thought has arisen, what is the true face of the elder Myo before his father and mother were born? What is the true face of the elder Myo before his father and mother were born? So you can see from that that obviously Daito Kokushi is, referring back to this. So this koan, which is called the Six Patriarchs' True Face, appears in a koan collection called the Mumonkan, which is a very famous collection of koans. So that gives you a little bit of a sort of supporting context for what's going on here. And so we see also a little bit later, Daito Kokushi says, when it's said of others, of the ancients, that they had a great realization or a great breaking through, it means they saw the original face. The second patriarch stood in the snow and cut off his arm to get realization. The sixth patriarch heard the phrase from the Diamond Sutra and was enlightened. Rayan was enlightened when he saw a peach blossom. Kyogen, on hearing a tile, just a bit of stone, hitting the bamboo. He threw a bucket full of stones, which he'd swept up, into a bamboo thicket, and a particular stone or tile clicked on the bamboo, and he had his awakening. Rinzai, when struck by Obaku, Tozan, on seeing his own reflection in the water. So we see that, in fact, what is interesting here, just for our purposes, is that this insight doesn't and rarely arises in meditation. Even the Buddha, it's saying of the Buddha that he was coming out of meditation when he looked up and saw the morning star, and then he awoke and became the Buddha. So in fact, this insight doesn't happen in deep meditation. It happens in the ordinary everyday life, and we never know when it's going to happen. It can just happen very suddenly. But it needs something from the outside and something from the inside. And this is what's known sort of colloquially as the coming together of karma, which is the inner, that's the mental state, and dharma, which is the environmental state, the outer state. There has to be a coming together of the karma and the dharma. And in that moment, then the insight happens. And it can do that because there is no separation between the karma and the dharma. The two are one. Everything is just the one thing. As I said, the true nature is ever present and permeates. And this is why even in the Pali Canon, it says whether or not Buddhas arise or whether they don't arise, the true nature is ever present. It's everywhere and ever present, whether Buddhas are around to teach it or not. I'm just sort of looking at the time. I'll finish on one final thing, because I think this is particularly important as well when we are sitting meditation. Because it's important to understand this particular part clearly. Every time a thought arises, throw it away. Just devote yourself to sweeping away the thoughts. Sweeping away thoughts means performing zazen. When thought is put down, the original face appears. The thoughts are like clouds. When the clouds have cleared, the moon appears. The moon of eternal truth is the original face. So this is a very classic and very old analogy that, if you're keeping in mind everything that I've said, that this one who knows is already a Buddha. He doesn't become enlightened, he already is. It has always been enlightened. This consciousness has always been enlightened, but it's obscured. And it's obscured by these grasping thoughts, basically. And the analogy is, it's like the sun behind the clouds. We know the sun is always shining, even when we can't see it. So once the clouds have gone, then we see it. And it's the same with the heart. It's the same with the original face as well. When the obscuring, delusive thoughts, which are like clouds, have vanished, then the true face, the heart Buddha, is revealed in all its wholeness and in all its purity as well. But we need to be careful, because if we begin to get in our practice of meditation another false idea, which is somehow I must get rid of my thoughts, then actually what we find is that this is like the story of the turtle who tried to wipe out his footprints in the sand using his tail, and he only made a bigger mess and left a bigger trail as a result. And if you've ever tried during meditation, trying to actively not think, we know it's like pouring petrol on a fire. So that's not how we do. When he talks about sweeping away, again, it's not I meditating, it's not I sweeping away the thoughts. Actually, when he says put them down, let them go, so declutch, rather than pushing a thought away, because if I try and push a thought away, I'm judging it. And that judgment is another thought. So I'm trying to use the thought to put down a thought, and obviously that's not going to work at all. So there has to be a declutching, and this is how we meditate. This is how we practice meditation in activity. We let go and give ourselves into what at this moment is being done anyway. And when we do that, what we find is that the activity of the heart of itself begins to slow down. And it's learning to let go. Just that learning to let go. And this is why the best place to learn is either using the breath, when we give ourselves into the out-breath. Because when we give ourselves into the out-breath, we sink down, isn't it? There's a sort of, like when we sigh, we go, ah. There's a sort of, there's a release, and there's a sinking down into the body. And I said at the beginning that Zen really puts an emphasis on the body. Why? Because the heart's attention, the focus of the heart, is usually very much in the thinking. I'm walking down the street thinking, I'm cooking thinking, I'm washing up thinking, and I may be thinking about what I'm doing, but I'm still thinking about it. I'm not actually at one with it. So the thing about the body is that the body doesn't think. If you pinch yourself in the arm, is there a thought in it? Or is it just pure sensation? Do I need to think, oh, this is a pinch in order to feel a pinch? Or does it just arise into consciousness? Which is it? Do I have to think about it? No, it just arises, the sensation arises into consciousness. Right now, there is the sensation of our backsides on the seat. That's been there every single second we've been sat down. But mainly it's probably not been in awareness. Yeah? We've been thinking about something else, maybe thinking about this talk. But in that sensation of our backside on the seat, there is no thought. If we give ourselves into that sensation, it's just sensation. There's no thought. When we give ourselves into the sweeping, when we give ourselves into the washing up, when we give ourselves into the eating the meal, the washing up the cup, the opening and closing of a filing cabinet, even the dialing on a mobile phone, when we give ourselves into that, there is no thought in it. There's just the one who's doing. And this one who's doing and the one who knows are the same as well. And this is how we begin to enter into this place that Daito Kokuji is talking about. Whether rising or sitting, keep concentrated and watchful, or aware, perhaps better. All of a sudden, the original face will confront you. Okay, well, I think we'll leave it there for now. I think that's probably talked for long enough. So we'll come to an end there, and I think we'll just have a few more minutes quiet meditation, and then there's an opportunity to ask any questions. Okay. So we have a few minutes if anybody has any questions.
Well, if I may start, Martin, you've often spoken about, in fact, when you do a guided meditation, for those who have never done it before, you talk about that out breath, that sinking feeling, and letting go. So sweeping away the thoughts is not a deliberate act, it's a letting go.
It's a letting go, and I think there's two things here, because I don't know the Japanese. Obviously, this was written in Japanese originally, which has been translated into English. Though Trevor Leggett obviously was a very good translator. But I think with that motion of sweeping away, it's more physical. The analogy is I think more physical. It's rather like, for example, if you have a hobby. I mean, if you play a sport or something like that, people often find it very relaxing to play a sport because you can walk into, you can be going to the leisure centre or the tennis court or whatever, thinking about all the things that have happened to you in the day. But when you're playing, there's nothing. All of that's gone. In a way, I disappear into the playing with that, and I think it's the same when he's talking about the sweeping. If you imagine that you were actually sweeping your path and you were really vigorously doing it, if you're really giving yourself into, if you become at one with it, this is what's called samadhi. When you become at one with it, then I disappear. All my concerns vanish, and there's a release from that. And this is why the Zen puts the emphasis on physical training and good form, precisely so that there's a forgetting of myself and giving myself. And I think it's in that way that sweeping away of thoughts. Don't imagine a little man going around inside your head, going like this, a thought, sweep it away. Because that's just more thinking, really. So that would be counterproductive. So that sweeping away is quite literally losing myself into what at this moment is being done, which is, for example, is that breath. The breath, I've pondered this a little bit. Why the breath? Why the breath? Because technically, you could use anything as an object of meditation. A lot of people do. You could use the sensation, for example, of your feet on the floor. Just bring your heart back to feeling your feet on the floor instead of, onto the breath. But I think the breath, there is something special about the breath. And it's that the breath will be performed by the body or the heart or the true face, if you like, or it can be done by an act of conscious will. So I can hold my breath, I can breathe out to 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, and I can breathe into 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. But as soon as I stop doing any of that, then the body takes over. So there's an interface between conscious will and whatever's doing all this anyway. And when we talk about meditation, we talk about following the breath, don't we? Because that's how it's translated. So the meditation on the breath is often called, anapanasati is often called, translated as following the breath. And I see that rather like if you imagine a ballroom dance. You have one that leads and one that follows. So what we're doing is we're letting the unconscious lead, and we're learning to let go and give ourselves into the breath as a follower. So instead of me exerting my will onto the breath and trying to make the breath slow down or go longer or whatever my idea is, let go of that and just allow the function of the breathing to do the leading. And by learning to let go and give myself into the breathing, that's following the breath. So the breath is happening anyway, just let go and give ourselves into that. Because that's how we practice. When we're walking down the street, when we are sweeping the leaves, the body's doing these things anyway. All I have to do is to let go and become it and fall into it and just allow that to do it. And then there's a flow. There's a flowing into that activity. And that has a certain attitude. So when someone comes and calls my name, Martin, I turn and immediately say, yes. There's no thinking about it needed. I walk into a room and I see that, that somebody's left the heater on. There's no question of saying, well, I didn't leave it on, so why should I have to turn it off? That's a judgment. There's a need, and the heart just responds to that, so it goes and switches it off. Or the plant looks a bit wilted because it's dehydrated. The heart sees it, and immediately there's no thinking, just go for the watering can. And I don't think, well, it's not my turn to do that, the watering. That's what I might think. But the heart itself just responds to the circumstances. And it's in this way we become aware of the presence of this true face. We become aware of this one who is functioning all the time. And this is something that's much bigger than I. Something that's much bigger than I. So I think, as I say, that breathing has that interface. And I think I suspect that's why the Buddha used the breath as the object of meditation in the beginning.
So in Zazen, we tend to lean towards the Tibetan traditions. Although we have various speakers from different traditions, because by tradition we follow Tibet, mostly a Tibetan style. And so, for instance, the last teacher who sat here was he was a Brit, but he lives in India. He's a Buddhist monk of the Tibetan traditions. And so he was talking about, actually what he was talking about was, he's a strong believer in therapy. He feels that, during meditation, thoughts will arise, situations from the past or issues, and I can't remember if he gave an open question, how would you deal with this? But I said that, relax into it. And he said, well, yes, you can relax into it, but that still remains, that nub of whatever it is that's causing that issue. Put in therapy of some sort would be the solution. What do you feel about it? I mean, in your tradition, is this what happens? You just follow the breath, for instance?
So, well, to answer the therapy question, I mean, therapy has a place, obviously. I mean, any therapeutic intervention obviously has a place, but not everybody may need therapy. So Zazen Zazen can be supportive. It can support people in therapy, but it's not a substitute for it. I mean, I've known people who have, used therapy or may have had. So, for example, I can think on a number of cases on occasions when we've got a couple of people who have had schizophrenia for years who sit with us, and they, it's all regulated with the medicines that they take. But I do remember one guy, he used to come and sit on a session on a retreat, 5-day silent retreat with us, and had done for many years. And then one day, I think he just got sick of taking his medication. He decided that he was going to take the opportunity to come off his medication, and he began to go florid again as a result. So you don't meditate your way out of those things. In the way that meditation is not going to cure your diabetes either. So those, all these things have a place. There's no doubt about it. But the Zazen is still doing something different. Render unto Caesar what is Caesar's.
In the traditions that we tend to follow, we have the equivalent of Zazen, calm abiding meditation.
Yes.
Yeah. But we also have Vipassana.
Yes.
Analytic meditation.
Yeah.
Is that the case?
Yes. So we use koan training. Koans.
Oh, koans, yes. Okay.
Yeah. So it's the same. You have the so you have what's called samatha meditation, which is the calm abiding,
yes.
and then you have insight meditation,
yes.
which is what Vipassana is, and which I think Tibetan initiations, so forth, like Mantrayana and use of mandalas and so forth, those are also used for developing insight. But in Zen we use the koan method, or we can use. I mean, that's one of the methods. There are other methods that are also used as well.
I mean, to hear it's as if that's it. The practice is
just to say. I mean, but the two things go together. You have to. The samatha meditation we spend a lot of time on, because unless those clouds have disappeared to some degree, and the true face is present, then you can't really do any vipassana. You can't really do any insight training, because there's the heart, which is a mirror. The function of the heart is called the prajna paramita, the wisdom gone beyond. So the one that knows, the one that responds to the circumstances, that's the prajna paramita. So the heart sees, but the heart itself has no form. But the function of the heart is the wisdom gone beyond. So that's the one that responds to reality, to the way things really are. And once that has been attained to some degree, then practices like koan training or mantras or vipassana will begin to operate, because you're at that level. Consciousness now is functioning without the clouds of delusive eye, if that makes sense.
But would shamatha or calm abiding, following breath, for instance, objective meditation, be sufficient?
It can be.
Yeah.
So the Soto Zen school just use that. Yeah. But even then, they have what's called mondo, which is it's a dialectic. It's a dialogue between master and student.
Okay.
And again, it's in the same way that the Buddha looked up and saw the morning star, or rain smelled the peach blossoms, and Kyogen heard the pebble click against the bamboo. There has to be that inner and outer coming together, because otherwise it cannot just be totally interior, because this is not something that's totally interior. The heart is everywhere. We say, the heart, we like to say, the Buddha nature is inside, or is, the Buddha heart is within us. Actually, we're within it. So it's not inside us. Actually, we are inside it, is probably a better way of putting it. Because the world, don't forget, the world from the world that's seen through the eyes of I is a deluded world. By definition, according to the Buddha's teaching. What the Buddha saw was radically different to anything that I understand. So none of this will make sense to I. That to I, no I, or emptiness, just doesn't make sense. No. We think we know what it is, but we don't. It's just we have an idea of it. It's not it.
I'm very conscious I'm asking the question, so I'll stand down. I've got other things I could ask, but please do.
The true face. So if we do our calm abiding meditation, sweeping all the things, that allows us to be in touch more with that true face. So,
yes.
Is that sort of what intuition comes from?
Yeah. Yes. It's where everything. Yes, it is. Yeah. It's The use of the term, prajna paramita, or the wisdom gone beyond, so refers to what is it beyond? It's beyond I. So, for example, you're familiar with the teaching of the parameters, the 6 parameters, and sometimes the 10 parameters. So that term parameter, param means going beyond or crossing over. And it actually refers, if you remember the Buddha's parable of the raft, remember that one where the Buddha says that, so this is from the Pali Canon where he said that his teachings were like a raft. You imagine a man standing on one side of a river and there's no bridge, there's no boat, there's no ford. How is he going to get across? Because on this side there's danger, this is samsara. On the other side there's peace, that is nirvana. So he has to make a raft. So he gets logs and vines and makes a raft, puts it on the water, paddles over with his hands and feet. He crosses over to the other shore. So there's this, it appears again and again and again in Buddhism, this whole crossing over. So that was the analogy. So the Buddha said, my teachings are for crossing over with, they're not for seizing hold of. So you use them to cross over to nirvana, then they're done. You don't need them anymore. This was taken in Mahayana Buddhism and formulated into what was called the parameters. So those parameters, which like giving and discipline and patient endurance and meditation and wisdom and so forth. These are and the last one is prajna paramita, or the wisdom gone beyond. It's the culmination of the practice of all the other parameters that have gone before. But what this going beyond means, it means going beyond what I can do. So all of us have, because I identify with my opinions, including my self-opinions. So I think things like, well, I should be able to get up at 7 o'clock in the morning. And if I can't, I get very upset about it. As I did get very upset about it. That's a self-belief. So that's saying who I am, what I can do. Okay, we all have those. So I can give you another example. So I remember there was an old lady used to come to one of the Sunday talks I used to give very regularly, and I'd been talking about we bow and we give ourselves away into what at this moment's being done. She came down and she said, it makes complete sense, the Buddha's teachings. Yes, I give myself away. She said, the problem is I don't have enough I to give away, to give myself away. I said, what do you mean? She said, well, I always feel, that I have such low self-esteem, I always feel that I can't. I always feel that I lack the confidence. I always feel that it'll be too complicated, or it'll be too much for me, or it'll overwhelm me. And so I'm frightened. And so I always play it safe. She said, what I really need to do is to build up my sense of I, and then I can lay it down, you see. So I said, no. I said, who is it that tells you that you can't? Who is it that tells you that you lack the confidence? Who is it that tells you that you'll find it overwhelming? That's I, that God Almighty complex that is saying, you can't do this. That's the one you're believing. That is I. That's what needs to be laid down. And she looked at me, and that sweet little old lady vanished. And there was something very cold and very steely in her eyes. And she said, but I am rubbish. And you don't argue with that one. Now, those are the delusive thoughts. But that's the clinging attachment. That's who I am. So this I can be very negative. But it's me. And my God, I won't let it go. So how do we get onto this? Intuition. That's right. So that there's a point where we go beyond that, and as soon as we go beyond that, it falls down. So once we then discover that actually it is possible to not always have my own way and be okay, and once we go beyond that, that's called going beyond. There's a wisdom that goes beyond I. So yes, I do know things, but there's a wisdom that lies beyond I. That's prajna paramita.
It's the bit that walks the tank without really thinking.
Yes.
Intuitively it knows, well, that is a constructive thing to do.
No, it doesn't think that. It doesn't say it's a constructive thing.
But somewhere does it have that wisdom?
That all comes afterwards. So you might think, so when someone says, why did you water that plant? You'll make up a reason. But you didn't need that reason to do it. In talking about koans, there's a koan from anyway, I think it's it might be from the Mumon Can, where the master ascended the high seat to give his sermon, and he said, so in the monasteries before the midday meal, the abbot would always give the sermon. You see, so a bell would be rung, and the monks would have to go and stop working, go and get changed into their robes, and they put on what's called a kesa. Well, they don't put it on, they put it over their arm like this, and then they go and stand, and they hear the sermon. Now, this kesa has to be folded 7 times, so, and they have to put it on for this sermon. So the bell rang, and the monks assembled, and the master ascended, and he said, "Why did the monks put on the 7 stripes roll, the 7 folded roll, when the bell goes?" And what he was asking was, when your alarm goes off in the morning, why do you get out of bed? Do you lie there thinking, well, actually, if I don't get out of bed and I don't go to work, I'm not going to earn any money, and if I can't earn money, I can't pay the mortgage, and I'll lose the house. I don't want to lose the house, so I better get up and go to work. Does anyone have that conversation in the morning? No. So when the telephone goes, do you think, oh, I wonder who that could be? And if maybe it's Bob. Oh, if it is Bob, what will I say? But if it's Denise, I'll have to think of something else. What am I going to say if it's Denise? So if it's Steve, what would I say to him? Or do I just answer the phone? Oh, hi, Bob. And then we just go from there. But we don't think about it. There's a flow. There's a flow. And it doesn't come from I. In fact, if I stop and think, oh, God, actually, I don't want to talk to Bob because he wants me to do a favour for him, and actually I don't want to do it, and yet I don't want to tell him that I don't want to do it. So I don't really want to see him, so I'll pretend that's I. That's I. There's a split. Yeah?
So it's going with the flow. It's not so much.
That intuition that you're talking about arises out of that. But until it arises, you don't know what it is. That's the whole point of an intuition. You don't arrive at it rationally. It just lands, doesn't it? And you think, oh yeah, there's an aha. But until it actually happens, you couldn't have guessed it. It arises from beyond I. It comes in.
I suppose in a way this is the I getting away from me, because I'm sort of thinking it is part of the benefit of meditation that you do tap into that intuition or go with the flow there a bit more, and then life sort of opens up a bit.
Yes.
But I guess I've got to be careful. That's the I thinking, oh yeah, I'll do meditation because that improves that.
But that's inevitable. I mean, that's fine, and the Buddha understood that. But in the end, that has to fall off too. Yeah. I think there's one of the biggest, and this might sound strange, but one of the biggest helpers, one of the biggest supports for meditation is faith. Because it requires faith to let go. To let go and fall into nothing requires a great deal of faith. To I, that is terrifying. If you think about what a lot of what our thoughts are, it's often planning and anticipating and trying to rehearse and doing lots of things for something that we imagine is coming up into the future. For example, there's a nice story from Master Rinzai. So his teacher was Master Obaku. So one day Obaku called Rinzai and he said, oh, there's another Zen teacher who's in another monastery nearby, and I have my doubts about him. I'd like you to go and test him. And Rinzai said, okay. And so he went and put his hat and coat on and his shoes. And he was just about to walk out of the door, and Obaku shouted after him and said, when you get there to the other monastery, what are you going to do? What are you going to say to him? And Rinzai, without breaking his stride, said, when the time arrives, the means will become available. In other words, imagine if I had to do that, I would be on that journey. I could easily be thinking, what am I going to say to him? How will I test him? The master wants me to do this good job. I want to appear like a good student. Da, 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 da. I could have had all that. He said, no, there's no need, because when Rinzai arrives and the time is there, the means will become available. That requires faith. He was prepared to let go. It is a leap of faith. Yeah, yeah. It's faith. Yeah, it's trust.
Do you think somebody online wants to ask anything?
Yeah, is there any? If there is, yeah, you just feel free to unmute and say if there's anyone online who wants to ask. Everyone looks quiescent
You've satisfied our needs, Martin.
for now. Okay, should we leave it there?
Okay.
Thank you.
Maybe we do a dedication, or do you want to do one from your side? Okay, so at the bottom of the page there is a dedication of marriage, basically where wishing that whatever has arisen from this practice will benefit all beings who are suffering, especially those who are suffering either physically or mentally. May they overcome their suffering, or at least be able to face it. May whatever benefit that arises from this practice go to the benefit of all sentient beings, stirred by the waves of birth, sickness, aging, and death. May they be free from